Good morning, Dom. Thanks for chatting with me. I wanted to dive in or talk to you about your operational insights that you've picked up over your career in mining. But first, I was hoping that you could provide a bit of background, a bit of context to who you are, what led you to where you are today.
Real pleasure to be with you, Alex. Really appreciate the time with you and hopefully speaking with your audience as well. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Dymaxim. We're an industrial AI company specializing in minerals processing optimization. I'm a qualified minerals process engineer by background, about 19 years in the industry, spanning a whole bunch of different roles from operations, consulting, technology commercialization, leadership. Uh, I've worked all over the world, in Australia, Kazakhstan, Zambia, Philippines, commissioning plants, running plants, optimizing plants, everything from grinding, flotation, smelting, refining, with multinationals like Glencore, with research institutions like UQ, all the way down to two-person startups like Dymaxim. And my most recent role that I've just finished was with MyPack, who are a automation control and data engineering company that's somewhere in between, about 200 people, also spread globally.
You've sat on all sides of the table, all over the world. Um, I, you've obviously picked up a few things along the way. What is the sort of the core belief or idea that you've picked up, or something that you know or understand, um, that you don't think is common in the industry, or people you talk to?
Yeah, I'll probably split those into a few things. Firstly, what I believe, the countries that I mentioned I've worked in, many of those are developing countries, and you've really seen how people live in those countries, and particularly the Philippines experience, where it was a collectivist culture, really opened my eyes to how we should operate when it comes to extracting our resources from the earth. And it's incumbent on us to really extract those resources efficiently. Uh, and it sort of led to the purpose for Dymaxim, which is to ensure that every ton of ore we process is processed to its full potential. When it comes to understanding what most people don't, I guess what I've found, particularly in my time in operations, but also at MyPack, is that it's not often a technology gap, it's an adoption gap. What we find is when we try and introduce technology into an operation, it really fails to achieve that adoption because we're not really defining what problem we are trying to solve, whether the technology we're introducing is most suited to solving that particular problem, or whether there's something simpler that we could use to solve that problem. Very rarely are we linking the technology or the initiative to the organization's strategic objectives. Um, we're not setting success metrics to define whether that project or that initiative's been successful. We're not sponsoring or championing that project sufficiently. And often what we find is that most operations personnel haven't actually championed a change initiative themselves, and so they're going through those mechanisms of learning the skill of hard knocks that people like yourself and myself have already experienced, and if you're a wise person, you try and learn from other people's mistakes. And probably lastly, that inability to engage the full cross section of stakeholders, so that what you're trying to implement is actually set up for success from day one. You've got operators in the room, you've got maintenance in the room, you've got managers in the room, etc. And what you're focusing then on is all of the fundamentals that require a technology initiative to succeed. So, is your instrumentation in place? Do you have the operational discipline to make sure that instrumentation is working and functioning? Have you empowered your frontline teams to make decisions? Have you enabled them with the right tools to actually see what's going on and make decisions in the moment when that opportunity loss is there, and not afterwards? I see that you might be wanting to ask a question on that, so I'll just pause there.
You've brought up so many things that we obviously see and we're passionate about as well. And I think the adoption gap is the big conversation today that we'll get into. The the question I had that sort of came to mind. I've also worked in developed and developing countries, and I worked in more of a engineering, asset management, or even construction capacity in some of those, so not specifically or directly mining. And what I noticed was a lot of technology and machines, they're not only expensive, but they're hard to maintain. And so in some of these countries, it was cheaper to throw 100 people at a problem to dig a trench than it was to get a trenching machine, because getting parts, getting the people that are able to do the maintenance and to keep the machine running. When you mentioned it with technology, do you see that specifically in mining playing out as well across developed and developing countries in terms of adoption and how the problem or the technology is approached?
Yeah, that interesting aspect of the cost of technology versus a whole bunch of resources really only looks at one dimension of cost. And whilst you want to boost employment, and that's often a fundamental of developing countries' governments, what you fail to see there is the cost of inconsistency, right? So if you've got a technology or a piece of equipment that you can implement, you can then optimize, and then you can standardize how that optimized piece of equipment is functioning. The problem with getting, say, 100 people to do something is that you introduce inconsistency, right? You'll have some people that perform really high, and then you have some people that might be less experienced that don't perform as well as that most experienced person. And that's actually the place that Dymaxim operates. What we're trying to do is really lift that least experienced person or operator up to the most experienced operator, and then help that most experienced operator deliver that every hour, every shift, every day, every block, and to the point where you're starting to push the system. So you've raised the floor to the ceiling, and now you actually want to try and lift the ceiling. So that's where I see the benefits of using equipment and using technology to help people. It's not replacing, it's not either or. It's how do you use technology to empower people to achieve the best that they can achieve.
Yeah, and I guess that fits in with our view that technology is just leverage. It's a big lever. It just makes whatever there is better or worse faster, and so you've really got to fix what that underlying element is. With what you've spoken about with the adoption gap, was there one specific time or project, or did you just see this consistently everywhere you went?
Literally consistently everywhere I went. It's really funny how, you know, there's a thing in Australian media right now around monoculture, right? Not something that I support, but I've been to a whole bunch of different countries, and it just amazes me, but it doesn't surprise me, I guess, anymore, that we all have the same issues, the same problems nowhere where we go. It's just that we're looking at things through a different lens. It's incredible the number of similarities that we have in an operation in Kazakhstan, in Zambia, in the Philippines, or in Mount Isa in Queensland, Australia. Tackling things with slightly different backgrounds and slightly different approaches, but it's often the same problem, which is great because we can solve it in one place and adapt that to the other places where we can solve it as well.
So, who is Dymaxim for?
So the reason that we started Dymaxim was we were seeing that there's a genuine pull from the industry right now for AI. And that's a really unique situation compared to where the sector has been in the past. It's been companies that I've been part of previously trying to push technology into an operation, and there's been resistance. Whereas nowadays, we're seeing that people are using AI in their everyday lives, and then they walk through the gate and they sit down in their control room at their monitors, and they're saying, "Hey, I'm still operating in yesterday's paradigm. Surely there's got to be a better way. Surely I can use the benefit that I'm seeing and experiencing with AI outside of the workplace in the workplace." So I think that's sort of the first thing that we were seeing. And the second thing that we were seeing is that there's these large AI companies, there's these large consulting companies trying to leverage AI, and they're just overcooking it. They're making it way more complex than it needs to be. And I can say that with a bit of authority because I used to work at the University of Queensland with JK Tech, and we had you know uh, programs there that ran 50, 70 years, 75 years even, around trying to model flotation and grinding and whatnot. And what I found there is that the flotation process is so complex that even if you did understand it, you can't actually measure all the variables that are important in the plant. And if you can, you can't do it at the scale or in the time frame that we need to actually make a difference to how the plant's performing. And I think that there's these companies that are applying a little bit of ego to the AI, and they're trying to make things too complex. And what I love about the way that my business partner has applied AI in her experiences, she's doing it in a really simple way, and it works. Right? It's not trying to predict. It's not trying to build this complex model and predict how you should operate in the future. What we're doing is we're actually looking back in the past and saying, hey, your best proven performance is actually sitting in your historian right now. You've done it already. And so let's just surface that to the operator, and essentially let's just reflect a mirror to the operator and say, hey, you've operated in these conditions previously. Did you perform better under a different set of plant settings back then? And can I surface that to you right now? And straight away, you've taken that first step around adoption, right? You're not asking them to trust a prediction that they don't understand, that they don't have full visibility on. They're saying, hey, I've actually operated that way in the past, or, Joe Bloggs has operated that way in the past, and I respect that person because they've been around for 20 years. I feel comfortable to operate there again, and I know I'm going to lift my performance because I can see what that performance gap is. And so who we're for is brownfield operations, sort of mid-tier, complex process that they've seen inconsistency in how operators are performing day to day. They might have a skills shortage. We've got a real problem right now across the industry, not just in Australia, globally, around skills shortages. And so they're looking for ways where they can bring, somebody that was working at Woolworths a week ago into their operation, and within a week lift them to the most experienced operator that's ever been on site, and then set that as the standard. And then we have a second phase in our approach, which with statistically controlled steps just raises that ceiling even further. And one thing that I think a lot of people are missing in AI and in advanced process control tools and whatnot is that the solution, you train the model, and then the model degrades over time as conditions change. With our approach, every time you lift the ceiling, that data automatically goes back into the database and is used by our application to as a proven operating point. And so you don't have to retrain our models. The only time you retrain our models is if you find that there was a variable that is important that you left out the first time round, and now you want to add it back in, and you've got to go through a process of retraining the model on that occasion. But otherwise, you just continue to grow the database, and the algorithm continues to look at that previous database, see where you're operating, see if you've operated better previously with different plant settings, and then it surfaces those plant settings back to the operator.
You're effectively providing an individual coach for every operator on site, and it's effectively taking best practice coaching, as you said, reflecting back and closing that feedback loop and making it shorter. It's not shifts or weeks or months in terms of getting that data back. It's almost instant.
It's instantaneous to a point, right? And this is where we could sort of fall back on my experience in operation, right? Is if you've got a plant that has a residence time of a couple of hours, you don't want to be making a change every 10 minutes, right? You want to see the change reflected in what's actually happening, right? And so you might have a 2 hour residence time. And I guess the guideline or the benchmark for making changes is typically around 2.5 times residence time. So if you're 2 hour residence time, that's what, 5 hours? You're probably doing a reflection every 5 hours and surfacing that back to the operator and saying, okay, should you make another change? Because that's now moved through the system effectively. So it's about applying the theory, the data, and the practice all together so that you're maximizing value. Too often we see, particularly inexperienced metallurgists and engineers, they'll leverage theory and data, but they won't think about the practice. Or you'll get an operator that just makes observations and practice, and that's good, but they're not considering the data and the theory, right? If you can combine all three, then you're starting to make really robust, informed decisions that generate value.
Just using that example of, say, 5 hours, I imagine then this then sits across shifts. So if you've got a 10 or 12 hour shift and you've then got a 5 hour cycle, you're basically doing one, maybe two in a shift. So that would then carry across shifts. Is that correct?
Absolutely, and that's also where we often see a breakdown in performance is shift change, but even more so in fly in fly out operations on that block change, where an incoming crew comes in and takes over, and they're looking at saying, okay, well, how do I actually absorb what's happened in the 8 days that I've been away or 7 days that I've been away, and then apply that. You don't have to go through that process anymore because this is surfacing it to you. Hey, don't worry too much about what's happened in the past, other than perhaps some constraints that have been applied. So say that pump impeller's flogged, right, and we don't have a standby duty. So we're going to have to limp that impeller through until we can actually shut down the plant and maintain it. So that might be a constraint that's applied, and you say, okay, I'm going to now cap my performance based on that constraint, so that I don't shut down the plant prematurely when we know it costs a lot more to do unplanned maintenance than it does to do planned maintenance, and the likelihood of getting it wrong and having to shut down again increases significantly if it's unplanned versus planned.
Yeah. I've been talking to other people in this space, the mining tech, mining supply space recently, and one thing that's come up, and you alluded to it before, is people using AI in their personal life, but we're also seeing at some sites just blanket licenses for the site. Here you go, you've got access to Claude or ChatGPT. And a lot of these sites, people are doing it themselves. They're downloading the data, often in a CSV kind of thing, uploading it into their platform and analyzing it. And I guess that's a risk, but you spoke to the importance of context and understanding. And is that where you see Dymaxim really standing apart from what a lot of these people are doing in sort of trying to interpret their own data? And they're obviously experts in their field, in geology or processing or whatever it is, but it brings in not only the data but the context, and you talked about the intersection of sort of capability and context and operations and strategy. Is that really where Dymaxim sits?
Absolutely. And I think everyone's heard of the horror stories where, you've brought a data science team into a business, either as a standalone unit, or you've brought a supplier into the business with a data science only lens. And they make these really horrible recommendations like, hey, there's a correlation between water addition to the SAG mill and density. Duh, that's how the formula works. Or, if you remove collector, recovery is going to go up, but that's an opposite to the theory. And it's actually created a lot of cynicism, I feel, within the industry around the potential for AI, and it's unfair in a way. And so that's why I love operating with and running Dymaxim with Elsa, because she's got that really strong applied AI. So her PhD was with Dow Chemicals in the Netherlands. So when she was studying for her applied AI PhD, she was actually doing it within Dow Chemicals, within their team, being able to speak with subject matter experts and really combine that data science and that subject matter expertise in one. And now we've translated that into Dymaxim. I bring that really strong operational and digital transformation background, uh, you know, based on the theory around minerals processing and metallurgy. And she provides that really applied AI background, having done this in many different operations from chemicals, oil and gas, and minerals processing. And now we've got that combination. So when we land on site, we don't have to learn what a SAG mill is or what a flotation cell is. We know what a SAG mill is, we know what a flotation cell is. And then Elsa knows, all the way from how to build an analytics team through to how to build a business case that stacks up. She's got this really great approach where if you put a business case in saying that you're going to save a cost, for example, she says, all right, that's going to come out of your budget next year. Do you still stand behind that business case, right? And that's where the rubber hits the road. If you're saying, hey, I want to spend this money and I'm going to save this amount of money, well, we'll put your money where your mouth is and take it out of your budget for next year. That really filters out a lot of business cases, right? And so what we're doing is we're bringing that experience, Elsa's 20 plus years, my 19 years ish experience, and we're combining that. And that's what we think we're doing differently to a lot of the players out there at the moment.
That was a really good explanation of that intersection and where the industry is struggling and I guess potential friction points. And we've spoken obviously offline and in the past before about that change and the adoption challenge. And for us, it comes down to two elements: will and skill. And you can have all the skill in the world, but if you're not interested, if we talk in terms of a business mandate, what is the business mandate to do that? And that's effectively connecting the business strategy, the business goals to the business case, to the technology. It's sort of that line of sight, top to bottom. And it sounds like that's what Dymaxim does really well in the first instance, and then providing some of that skill in there. When we talk about sort of people and teams, and then more broadly the capability that sits behind that.
Totally. And that skill doesn't just extend to the technical side, right? It's not the data science, it's not the AI, it's not just the data science, it's not just the AI. It's also how do you bring through a program like this? How do you overcome the resistance from different stakeholders by bringing them in early? Actually listening to them to define what the problem actually is, and then what are some options of how we solve that. And what we see time and time again is if you actually introduce people's suggestions into the solution, design it into the solution, codify it into the solution, and then they see their suggestion actually appear on the screen, I mean, there's no better way of getting people to adopt a new technology than that, right? And so we can help guide, a project champion along the process, and where we think it's beyond our resources or expertise, that's where the partner ecosystem comes in, and companies like First Principles Consulting can come in with that expertise and really ramp that up and accelerate it even beyond what just the likes of Elsa and I can do at Dymaxim. So the partner ecosystem is really important to how we deliver. Uh, if a client already has a partner that they use in that space, great, no worries. We'll work with them. If they don't, we have preferred partners like First Principles that could come in and help with that process.
One of the things I've noticed in sort of researching for the book that I wrote and speaking to people, there's a fair bit of data about change. Well, there's a lot of data out there about change and change management, and it looks at across different sectors. And mining surprisingly performed significantly worse than a lot of other sectors. And you spoke a bit before about push and pull, and something we see as a lot of self-diagnosis. So people going to market already sort of with a solution in mind, and it's not always the right solution, or the way I describe it is they're looking for step 4, and they need to do 1, 2, and 3 first. Why do you think this sort of exists in the mining industry? Is there something unique about the industry or the people it attracts, or is it just a function of how it operates?
There's a couple of things that I've seen in that space. First of all, I see that mining often operates in silos, and the KPIs that we set for different departments within the mining value chain don't actually consider who their customer is. The dirty C word in mining isn't the four-letter one, it's customer. And so if you can do a bit of a customer supplier assessment and say, okay, uh, what does your customer need, and how do you set your KPIs to deliver what your customer needs, right? And then all of a sudden the the way of thinking that we have around achieving our KPIs starts to translate to good. It's a bit like culture. I use an analogy where when you go to the beach and you're an average swimmer, and you go into the ocean and you get caught in a rip, uh, if you're not experienced, what you'll probably do is you'll swim against the rip. You'll quickly tire, and you'll need to be rescued. If you're an experienced swimmer, like an Iron Woman or an Iron Man, and you go into that ocean and you have to complete a race, and you have to get out to the buoy at the edge of the ocean, uh, you actually want to use the rip, right? You want to swim out with the rip. It's going to get you to that buoy as fast as you can. Then you swim sort of across it, back to the beach. I see culture the same way, right? You don't want to swim against culture. You want to try and swim with culture, and then just slightly nudge it to the way that you want to see it actually translate into your operation. And so KPIs is a really great example of that. You know, KPIs are ingrained in mining culture. It's just that we're applying them slightly incorrectly for the greater good of the mining value chain, right? If you can do that supplier customer assessment and say, what does your customer need? And that's often, iterative. Your customer is also your supplier. But if you can do that, then achieving your KPIs, which is what's been ingrained in you to do as a mining engineer or as a metallurgist or whatever the case might be, then you start actually generating system value because your KPIs are the right ones, and they're delivering what your customer needs. So I think that's one of the reasons why you've experienced what you've described around those failures in mining, is that we operate in silos. I think the second thing is that we're such a transient industry, and so what we see is often uh, it's an emerging leader that champions a project, right? It's not necessarily the most experienced person because they've gone. The operation doesn't have those people anymore, or they've been moved into a management role that they can't actually execute. They're just delegating, right? And so what we see is these project champions with all this inexperience trying to lead an initiative and not being adequately sponsored by that person that's got the grey hair, that's gone through the school of hard knocks and knows, the little intricacies of how to get a program or an initiative through the system. And so that coupling of the project sponsor and that project champion is really fundamental. And companies like First Principles Consulting coming in and helping that and building the capability, right? Is you don't want to create a dependency. You want to build the capability into the organization, bake it in so that you don't have to stay there. You can go and do the next deployment. And ideally, like Dymaxim, our measure of success is that you don't get us to come back and solve the same problem. We've done a good job somewhere, and you come and bring us into another part of the operation and we repeat it there, or you do move on to a different operation and we come across and we help you there. That's success, not staying boots on the ground in an operation for a long period of time, unlike our big consulting friends, and they know who they are.
It's something that I obviously speak about as well, because you described our business model as well as is lifting that capability, and when the consultants go, the results shouldn't leave as well. And one of the benefits, you talked about this standardization and transient workforce. Obviously, one of the big trends is the grey hair leaving at a greater rate than we're getting experience in or managing to capture it. For us, I see one of the benefits of what we do is creating a standard across sites within a company or portfolio, where people can then transfer. You can easily shift people and everything else, data and technology across sites because it's standardized. And is that something that Dymaxim really helps support and work towards as well?
What you described there, I think, is the nirvana.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that we support? Um, at least the mechanism is something that exists and would be transferable across different operations. But the algorithm that we use to do that is not transferable, right? The method transferable, the algorithm not transferable. So, and the reason for that is every ore body is unique, every plant is unique. Even if it's a copy and paste of one plant to another, there's always going to be inherent idiosyncrasies within that operation. So being able to have the mindset that your best operating condition has already been achieved, and all you want to do is surface that in real time to every operator and lift the floor. That's consistent, that's repeatable. How you go about doing that is repeatable, but the algorithm will be different each time.
And we find a similar thing. It's like there's a generic template for a MOS, but each MOS has to be tailored for each site because they're all unique for various factors. Is there, I guess in that same vein, is there anything you've discovered or learnt since going down this path with Dymaxim that sort of has challenged your thinking or beliefs, or has it only doubled down and confirmed what you'd observed up to this point?
It's really interesting, Alex, and I'll probably touch on that previous aspect that you just described about tailoring the MOS to the operation. I like to say that if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is, right? And a lot of people out there think that AI is this silver bullet that they drop it into an operation and they change nothing else and expect a performance transformation. Not going to happen, right? You still have to look at the way you lead as a leadership group. How do you engage with your team members? How do you empower them and enable them and introduce the appropriate processes and the appropriate technology at the right time so that decision making can happen in the moment. There are people who are empowered to make those decisions, and you're no longer walking in on a Monday morning going, "What happened over the weekend?" Right? That it's too late. The Monday meeting where you're trying to get things back on track, you've lost all of this opportunity that you could have gained over that weekend. And so what we're trying to do is put those tools in the hands of the people on the front line so that they can make the right decision at the right time and are empowered to do that. So that you now come in on a Monday meeting and you say, okay, yeah, there might have been underperformance, but we know exactly why that happened. It's not guesswork. And 9 times out of the 10, you're not actually spending the majority of the morning meeting looking back at the past and trying to piece together what happened. You're actually going into the Monday meeting and you're focusing it on the future. Instead of what went wrong, how can we outperform into the future? What can we do differently to boost the performance even further? Because the staff have been empowered and made decisions in the moment and got things on track, and the plant's in control.
Would you say that's the intended outcome, or is that a side benefit? And to put that in context, we at First Principles Consulting, we go and help with leadership and processes and technology and a lot of the stuff we've spoken about. And one of the unintended benefits that we've come to realize only by looking back is culture. That's our dirty C word, is culture on a site, because it's sometimes spoken about, but I don't think it's well understood, and that's not what we go out to solve, but that's the benefit. So just listening to what you were saying, wondering where that delineation is, what's the outcome and what's the unintended benefit that comes from it.
Yeah, look, it's really interesting. I started my career at Mount Isa Mines in the copper smelter there, and for a long time, I thought my job at the copper smelter was to produce anode. It produced anodes, so my job was to produce anodes. That actually wasn't my job. My job was to help the company make money, right? And so if you boil everything down, I'm a little bit cynical, right? At the end of the day, even though there's a balanced scorecard, everything funnels back up to financial metrics and making money. Now, there's certain things that are incumbent on us, and they're just good things to do to make money. But if we didn't do them, it would actually prevent us from making money. Safety, right? Yes, it's the right thing to keep people safe, so that our employees, come to work and they leave work as good or enriched compared to when they entered, right? But if we didn't do that, then we would have injuries, we would have costs associated with that. We might get a regulator to come in and they might shut the operation down. That costs us money, right? So good thing to do, but at the end of the day, it's smart because it benefits us financially. Another one's community. Right thing to do, help and support our community. And one of our goals as Dymaxim is to generate $1 billion of value for our clients and the communities in which they operate, right? And so we see that combined together. Right thing to do, but at the end of the day, if you don't have a community on site, you look at jurisdictions like Peru, where there's protests and they curtail production as a result of that. So I think it would be remiss of me to say that the primary objective is not to make money, it's to make money, right? But then you've got all these secondary intangible benefits, like, changing mindset in the daily production meeting. It flows to morale and culture, right? You bring that person from Woolworths a week ago into the operation, and all of a sudden they're performing as good as the best operator on your crew. That's a morale boost, right? You start to see, hey, if I leverage my experience to just lift that ceiling a little bit further, then all of my colleagues benefit from doing that as well. And I get a little bit of an ego stroke on my back to say, hey, I'm on the leaderboard, which is a really cool thing that we can do, as well as gamify some of this. So you're actually trying to compete with your peers, or even compete against the model, if you will. So yeah, there are these really interesting intangible benefits that we see that are often unexpected when we first go to deploy one of these programs. But they're definitely real. But they definitely translate from our observations.
That's what we see as well, is that all of those unintended benefits. And you're right, if you don't have that social license, especially on remote sites, I know up in PNG the locals would cut the power line, and then that was it, because they weren't happy. And you can find examples of that everywhere. I guess the last question for you is, what's the one thing we haven't discussed that you think is important and worth sharing?
Look, I think I probably touched on that with the uh, AI silver bullet comment. So maybe I think of something a little bit different. And one thing that I really think about is where we're trying to go with net zero and achieving, the Paris Agreement climate targets, and the amount of minerals that we need to have to generate, renewable energy and whatnot. Um, Latest data I saw is it's like we have to start 600 mines worldwide, right? And right now it's on average 16 years to get a mine from discovery to production. All right. The math don't work for me. I'm not the smartest guy, but the math don't work for me on that one, right? And so we have to do something differently. And what Dymaxim's doing our part, we're trying to make sure that every ton of ore is processed to its full potential. But I don't think that's going to be enough. We still have to open these mines, and we're not seeing, we're seeing talent exit the industry rather than flood into the industry, and it's so critical for society's future to get these mines up and running. What I'd love to see is that talent come flooding into the mining sector: mining engineers, minerals process engineers, mechanical engineers, all of those really critical disciplines that drive a mining operation, including trades, including operators, all those sorts of things. I'd love to see that flood in, and I'm hoping that Dymaxim is part of that solution. We're doing some extraordinary things, and hopefully we'll attract some extraordinary people, and our peers will do likewise, and we'll make the mining industry a sector that people really want to work in and work for, because they see the contribution that they make to society.
As an electrical engineer, I feel like you missed one in your list, but it's all right. I won't hold it against you. No, it's been great. So thank you for taking the time and sharing your insights across your career and where you think the industry is going, and obviously now the challenges that it's facing as well. Some of those are political, as you mentioned, with the 16 years. I believe a lot of that is about legislation and getting those through the government hoops there. And yeah, obviously the grey hair leaving and more people leaving than coming in is a real challenge. And I've written and spoken a lot about that, the silver bullets as in general. What can we buy and what can we plug in to that we don't have to do anything else? We just switch it on and it works and it solves all of our problems. And that's one of my big concerns is people going, well, AI or robots or XYZ will solve this problem for us. And I think you've done a really good job of articulating why that's not the case, and it's actually potentially not a wave that the industry is going to surf, but that may sink the ship if we're not careful and proactive and continue to communicate this. So yeah, thank you for your time.
Which I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and your audience.